Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're going to get started in just a few moments. We're going to let people fill in and join the webinar, so we'll get started in just a little bit. All right. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Andre, and it's a pleasure to welcome you all to this 49er industry chat. I'm a third year political science student, former student government executive, and this year's Panetta Institute Congressional intern. So I'm really happy to have Deborah join us today. Before we get started, we want to inform you that this session is being recorded, and it's also going to be available on our website if you visit csulb.edu/alumni. Once it's posted, feel free to share it with a friend, fellow alumni, or someone you know who would benefit from this chat. Also, we have a Q&A box that you can submit questions to. So feel free to drop any questions that you have for our guest speaker. Our alumni relations member, Rosalinda, will be helping moderate the chat during this webinar. Additionally, the alumni team wants to promote the CSU Voices. CSU Voices is the California State University's advocacy community that keeps CSU alumni informed of the issues shaping the future of the CSU. By taking simple actions like sending messages to elected leaders, you can influence state and federal policy decisions that affect students, campuses, and communities. Join CSU Voices and protect access, affordability, and the value of a CSU degree. We'll drop the link in the chat so that you can learn more and sign up. And right now, we're going to introduce our alumni speaker, Deborah Rowe. Welcome. And before we jump in, I'm going to share a little bit about her. She is a veteran Capitol Hill advisor. Deborah Rowe brings over 14 years of legislative experience to her role as manager of government relations at the Port of Long Beach. Most recently, she served as director of public policy at the Alpine Group, a bipartisan multi client firm in Washington, D.C. She joined the firm in 2023 and developed and executed legislative strategies that have led to significant appropriation achievements for her clients. Deborah's congressional career spanned over a decade as she served in the leadership offices of Congressman Steny H, the longtime Democratic leader. Her tenure on the Hill included nearly 10 years of working in multiple senior roles in House leadership, including as senior floor advisor for the majority leader. In this role, she provided crucial advice on parliamentary procedures and legislative strategy, led legislative communication efforts, built coalitions, managed key relationships, and oversaw day to day operations on the House floor. In her previous roles, Deborah also facilitated member services and whipping projects while organizing member events and communication. Prior to her time in Washington, Deborah worked in public affairs at the Disneyland Resort. Her career in public service began while she was in college, where she co founded the Student Lobby Corps and served as an executive in student government. Deborah graduated magna cum laude with a bachelor's degree in political science from California State University, Long Beach. And after 12 years in Washington, D.C., she recently returned to her Long Beach roots, working for the Port of Long Beach. She currently lives in Seal Beach with her husband, Michael, and their corgi, Popcorn. Deborah, thank you so much for joining us today and welcome.
Thanks, Andre. I really appreciate that. I hate hearing about myself, so that's a lot of information to share, but I'm happy to be here and be part of the industry chats.
Yeah, thank you. And again, to everyone, as a reminder, our moderator, Rosalinda, will be checking the chat. If you have any questions, you feel free to drop them in the chat and we can see if Deborah can answer those questions. But let's jump straight into it. And first off, in addition to the background I've already shared, I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about your experiences and what led you to Cal State Long Beach.
Well, Cal State Long Beach is the beginning and the end of all the things that have happened to me. By being a student leader and going to Cal State Long Beach, it really set the tone for what my career looked like. Um, so to go to your question about why I chose to go to Cal State Long Beach, it was, I am a first gen student. My mom was a single mom. She raised me to be, um, you know, with reverence for her education. She was a high school teacher, and she believed in, strong public education. So when I was choosing to go somewhere, I knew I was going to have to pay for it myself. I wanted to have a strong, public university, and I also wanted to have something that was affordable and quality. So Long Beach was not too far from home and not too close to home. I'm originally from Marietta, California. And it was the perfect blend of city and beach, and also had the majors that I was interested in going to. I originally started as a broadcast journalist major. And then that turned into a double major of political science, and then turned into going specifically into political science. So um, Long Beach gave me all those opportunities, and I was super happy to come to campus and learn a lot and bring that into a lot of my experiences, both on campus in Long Beach, and then also in my roles at Disney, on the Hill, and in Washington, D.C. It definitely gave me a lot to start off with, and be that driving force going forward.
Yeah, so it seemed like a perfect match. And once you did end up, arriving at Cal State Long Beach, I'm curious if you could share your student experience on campus. So think clubs,
Yeah.
activities, classes, and professors, or if you had a job, things like that. What was your experience like?
Yeah, because I was paying for college myself, I definitely was constantly either working or interning. I had a variety of different internships, from the state assembly to a law firm to MOLA to a bunch of different places, the Nixon Library. I really used my experience as a college student to kind of go after whatever I was kind of interested in. Um, and I would say that. Um, a lot of that came from also being a commuter student for the first couple of years of my career. I think that a lot of folks can relate to that. I commuted
Mhm.
for the first 2 years of college to save money, and then during my sophomore year, I got really involved in student government. So I started with the student media board, so it had that nexus between um, journalism and politics. So I was the
Mhm.
chair of that during my sophomore year. And then I got to know everybody in student government and got really involved. And I became Secretary of City Affairs, where I, went and worked a lot with City Council when, Robert Garcia was on City Council at the time and Bob Foster was mayor, doing, voter reg efforts, leading the largest one in the CSU, and then going on to be chief of staff and running the student body cabinet, and then also helping found by helping with the founding of the student lobby corps, which was, always doing advocacy visits up into Sacramento, which was really where I cut my teeth into politics. Um, so that, and along with Greek life, I was a Tri Delta, and I currently sit on a national board for Tri Delta. So there is a lot of things that were started within my time at Cal State Long Beach and the student experience, and then carried over into my life now, where I'm continuing to try and give back in those spaces where they like really invested in me, and really gave me the kind of like soft skills that allowed me to flourish later in my career. And that's all thanks to, my experience at Long Beach.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, your legacy has definitely continued on. My first step into college, I joined the student lobby course, so shout out you for that. Um, you mentioned a lot about public service and how you started doing that in
Mhm.
college, doing that in student government and a variety of experiences. So, what originally drew you to poli sci and advocacy work? And you talked a little bit about it, but I was wondering if you could expand on that.
Yeah, I think it all goes back to kind of my mom and, being first gen. My mom immigrated to America by herself, from Hong Kong, in her 20s. And so, raising us as a single mom, she always told us that education was important. That was the most important thing. So for me, I've carried that reverence with me. And so when I was in a position where I was a student leader and I was operating in the space where I could advocate on behalf of people around me who are like me, and have a voice, that's what really drove me forward in being able to advocate for higher education. So that piece of student government where I was introduced to, advocacy and policy and the ability to, do more than what's immediately in front of you. During that time,
Hmm.
um, our tuition went up like 200% between the time I
Hmm.
was a freshman until the time I was a junior. And we were having Cal Grants slashed, we were having, Pell Grants slashed. There was a lot of budget cuts up in Sacramento. And so that was like a big driver about what got me into politics was higher education. And when I went out to DC, I kind of thought that that was going to be my bread and butter. I thought that I was going to be an education advocate. But the cool thing is that like you go into these spaces and you have a drive and you find places that, have the ability to, you know, you're able to learn things that you didn't know existed. I didn't know that the house floor was something that I could do. I didn't know that was a job. I didn't know that, folks that, went to a CSU could also operate in places where, I was working with Ivy League grads and folks like that, and being able to hold my own and be in that space. So again, I think that all goes to, my upbringing kind of in being independent, being very fervent about my education, and then using that kind of passion to put it into higher education advocacy. And that led into advocacy as a whole and as like a passion for me to, make my spaces better and make my community better and make things easier for the folks that come after me.
Right. Yeah. So you fit into this advocacy, government, and politics space. Would you say, like, based on what you just shared, did you fall into it rather than like that was like a very intentional choice?
I think it's a little of both. I mean, I moved to DC, so I was working at Disneyland Resort doing public affairs. I
Hmm.
loved it. It was great. I worked my butt off to get to the places was at and the rooms I was at, but it wasn't public service, so I did a very risky thing. I quit my job without a job and I moved to DC.
Hmm.
And I slept on the floor of my friend's apartment while I went back to being an intern and, networked the heck out of it. And was very intentional about trying to stay in DC and make it work. And ended up being hired on in a House leadership office at the front desk, which led to me being invested in and then having a career that spanned a decade in a leadership office. Um, and so it was intentional in that like I knew what I wanted. I was passionate. I knew DC was the place I wanted to be. But again, I didn't know that these were jobs that existed. I didn't know that there were like going in um, to Washington. I think I even tell a lot of people that, ask me for mentorship and advice is that don't say no to a job you don't have. There are so many different niche like markets and jobs and verticals and things that like that exist. Um, and, you can use your passion to, help a small group of folks. You can use it for a large group of folks. But I think whatever I've kind of gone into has been driven by feeling of purpose. And so even with working in some spaces, like working in at Disney, which was great, it wasn't purposeful. So that's been something that's driven me, and it's something that I fall into because I'll find purpose in other roles and um, other things like board work or volunteer work or whatever it might be. Um, so I've kind of given myself that um, sort of uh, directive to do not just in my workspace and in the work that I do professionally, but also in my personal life, having a purpose-driven um, kind of angle to getting, things done and making the spaces I'm in better. Um, so a little bit of both.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Well, you've been so many different places, but obviously now you're back in Long Beach in our
Yeah.
town, and you're currently manager of government relations at the port. So I was wondering
Mhm.
if you could tell us more about your typical day in your current position.
Yeah, I mean it's like anything I think in the government space, it can be very drilled down and a day goes the same way as that like you're able to, go deep into a policy effort or, have days of meetings working with stakeholders and working internally to make sure our messages are on point and
Mhm.
making sure you're having the communications with the elected offices and the regulatory agencies that you work with. And sometimes it's just crazy. And like maybe there's like a bill that drops or there's something that happens in the community and you have to drop everything and really go for being supportive of your team during that time. Um, so it's always changing. It's definitely not like when I worked on the Hill and I was working 15-hour days and on the floor until 4 a.m. So I'm grateful for that. But it's been very rewarding to come back to Long Beach and come back to the Port of Long Beach, being such a huge economic driver, not just for the city and the region, but for the state and the country. And being able to kind of use my relationships and experiences and skill set to kind of implant in and be able to benefit the team by kind of like informing them on, the federal space and, getting us through a very difficult time in our country and for California. So every day is different, but it's been great to kind of be able to have that flexibility that was kind of instilled in me from my
Mhm.
time in Washington. So every day I'm not kind of caught off guard or off footing. I think that like I'm able to catch my footing pretty quickly because of the experiences I had in DC.
Mhm. Right.
Yeah.
So, as you mentioned, there are so many moving pieces to your job and government
Mhm.
affairs and advocacy. What do you think what does effective advocacy look like to you today?
Yeah. I mean, I think that like relationships can get you in the door, and I think a lot of like this advocacy is relationship based, but it's your knowledge based and your consistency and your authenticity that keeps those relationships going and keeps the door
Right.
open. Um, I think Andre, we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago when we met for coffee, and I had said, you know, these spaces are small, so everybody remembers
Mhm.
everything you do. Everybody's remembers when you remember to give them a heads up about something. They remember when you remembered to like give their boss like a shout out about something. Um, those are all small pieces that lead into bigger results because you're having relationships that are beneficial um, to your entity that you're working for, but also for the places that you're serving. And so being able to keep those relationships and communicate effectively
Mhm.
is just incredibly important and making sure that that line of communication is kept open um, and you're able to, admit when things are going wrong and you're able to also have that authentic conversation with folks that you're working with um, to be sure that there's not any kind of like border or, um, you know, doubt within that relationship because I think that that's becomes a huge thing when you're trying to work with folks. You want to make sure that you can trust them. And so that trust, consistency, and openness is something that I really tried to lead with, and I think is really effective when trying to be in these spaces where you're advocating for whatever it may be, money or policy, or just trying to, have that relationship.
Mhm.
Keeping those the things in mind are, I think, are the most important.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. So
Yeah.
you made a very intentional decision to move to Washington, D.C. Fun story that you shared. And you spent 12 years in Washington, but you returned back to Long Beach to work for the port.
Mhm.
What motivated you to make that transition?
I think that I love DC. I miss it a lot. I'm going back next week for a work trip, so I'm very excited about that. But I met my husband at Cal State Long Beach. We're both Southern Californians. We're both first gen. Our parents are getting older. So I think that personally that was a huge driver in coming home. Um, I think also another thing that, I think if Kamala would have won, it would have been a different landscape in the work market or the workforce and the market for Democrats, which I find myself in, although I do work in the bipartisan space and worked at a bipartisan firm. Um, but it just seemed like a good time to come and be back in California where I felt that there was a lot of things that I could do to be effective, where um, a lot of things in DC at this time kind of feel like they are at a standstill or that there's just a blockade. So um, it felt like the right time, both professionally and personally, to come back, be able to be helpful and effective in the communities that I had come from, and to kind of replant myself and be able to be a servant to California. And
Yeah.
so those were like the primary drivers of coming back.
Yeah, for sure. And we got a question from one of our attendees. Considering your role as government relations manager at the port, as well as previous experience on the Hill, what are some best engagement strategies for building bipartisan consensus among policymakers? So, digging a little bit deeper into that advocacy piece.
Yeah, I think again, I go back to reputation. I think that it's and like that open, honest conversation. I think that I benefited a lot from working for a very, very bipartisan member of Congress. Um, I just being able to say that I'm a Hoyer staffer, everybody in DC knows what kind of person I am. They know that I'm hardworking. They know that I'm smart. They know I'm bipartisan. They know I'm going to have an open mind. Um, and especially in a time where there is a lot of, division and whatnot, I think that being able to work across the aisle and know that the person you're working with is working just as hard as for something that they believe is as important as you
Mhm,
are, kind of gives me a little bit of peace. But I would say that it's just important to be open and make sure that you're being genuine and your reputation's intact. Because I think that ultimately, you know, again, DC is a small town, Long Beach is a small town. It's everybody knows everybody, and being able to operate in a space in a very genuine way is super important. And just knowing your stuff and being able to communicate in a way that makes sense to your audience. Because, the way I would whip, you know, Jimmy Panetta is going to be very different than some like Jerry Nadler or somebody like, I don't know, Chrissy Houlihan from Pennsylvania. All these people have different personalities. All these people have different priorities. So being able to know your audience, have that relationship authentically with that office or with that person, um, and being able to be reliable. Folks would come to me and ask for things that I would deliver. And so when I would ask for things, they would deliver. And that's just kind of this reciprocal kind of thing of, it's not always just like asks, but it's just like remembering things and being a human being and being like, cognizant of the spaces you're in. I think is like super important when it comes to advocacy. Because I
mhm,
think that there's a lot of, just asking for money and leaving, or, just that kind of roboticness when it comes to some folks who are in this space.
mhm.
But yeah, I would definitely say that those are the types of things that I would be focused on when looking at being successful in the advocacy space.
Yeah, definitely. So, as we've talked, politics has become very different and it can be really intimidating, especially for students who want to enter into that space. For students who do want to make an impact, what are some ways that they can start getting civically engaged right now?
Yeah. I think it like starts locally. I mean, I think that like think if folks are interested in something, think about what you're passionate about. I think that that's going to be the huge driver. So if you are passionate about your city, maybe you want to intern or like volunteer for a campaign in your city. If you're passionate about something that's happening on the regional level in like your county, maybe you want to work for a county supervisor or
Mhm,
intern or do something like that. Maybe you're super into, you know, making sure that like we're like homelessness is eradicated. Find something
mhm,
that you're really interested in, find an organization that does that or a space that does that, and volunteer your time. Just be ready to, put in some hours. And I think a lot of kind of when I refer back to when I was a student, I did a lot of different internships because I wanted to find, what that thing was. Um,
mhm,
and sometimes it's not a right fit, but always continuing to keep those doors open. I made sure never to burn a bridge when I left an internship that wasn't the right fit. When I left a job, I always made sure that we left on good terms. Um, even like being in seemingly different spaces, these are opportunities to continue to build your network. Um,
mhm,
because inevitably the district director for the Republican supervisor I worked for, or the Republican assembly member I worked for who became a supervisor now knows somebody else has the ability to help me like get in the door with somebody, or has the ability to help me find a job, or has the ability to talk to my
Hmm.
mentee who, I want to get in that space. So like I would say I think locally and just kind of build it out from there. Find out what you're passionate about. Go if you're interested in student government, check it out. I honestly I kind of didn't realize when I was a student how easy it was just to, volunteer time and just be part of it. I remember going to like the ASI booth when I was a freshman and talking to Erin
Hmm.
at the time, who was the ASI president, and she just gave me like 10 minutes where she just went through like, these are all our openings. Please email me. I want you to be involved. And like just doing something like that is just a small step you can take into finding out if this is the right space for you, or if there's something that like excites you in these spaces. Um, and then kind of like learning from that and building on.
Hmm. Yeah. We
Yeah.
got another question from our attendees. Could you share an example of a policy that you helped push through that was challenging and what you did to overcome that?
There's having run the House floor, a lot of things were pushed through that were insane. I would say that what became IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, and began as BBB, not that big beautiful bill, is Build Back Better, um, was probably the most insane experience on the House floor. Not necessarily advocacy, but pushing it through, because a lot of that had to deal with dealing with our members,
Hmm.
keeping up the vote count, having the votes be open for multiple hours while we're working behind the scenes trying to get things in order, and working with the parliamentarian to make sure that we're on track about what procedurally we need to do. Um, those types of things, I think the work on on the House floor is just never going to be replicated for me.
Hmm.
But having that experience was so informative to the stuff I do outside of the building. So building the coalitions, working with people, talking through issues, locating like your advocates, locating like who's going to be able to talk to this group of people that are, may not be on board yet. Um, those types of skill sets came from being on the House floor, and
Hmm.
being member services and being floor operations. So I would say if I were to point to something that I'm proud of and that that was part of, work that I was instrumental in, it was moving large reconciliation packages through our majority, and we got a lot done. The Chips and Science Act, CARES, and all these things. The IAJA, like a lot of crazy things that like now I think about it, it's like kind of feels like it was a million years away, but it was,
Yeah.
5 years ago. Um, but I would say that those were the most important to me, because being in the room where it happens and being a part of, historical legislation was huge. And I think that
Hmm.
outside of that, working in the appropriation space, helping clients get things for their projects in mental health and in, you know, the Army and all those types of things was also super helpful and exciting, because, when you get that win for somebody and it benefits that community, um, it's really fulfilling, and it gives you kind of the feedback that you want in like being a public servant. Um,
Hmm.
so yeah.
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 Like you said, part of how you ended up in your roles or being in politics was that you fell into it. And that's because after each internship you did, or each job that you did, you learned so much more about public
Mhm.
service. So I imagine that your perspective has changed in a lot of different ways. So I was wondering if you could highlight how your perspective on public service has evolved from your time as a student advocate to now working in government relations.
Yeah, I think that, in California, it's kind of homogenous. There's Republicans, but they're not super Republicans. They're in comparison to the folks that are in Washington. Um, so there's opportunity to work with folks here and like learn from different perspectives, but working in spaces where you're working with somebody that comes from a town of like 200 people, or you're working with somebody who, you know, grew up and didn't go to college, or there's all these different folks that come from different backgrounds, and whether that's socioeconomic or it's educational or it's location wise, both Republican and Democrat, and just like learning from those people and what's their why. um I think that that's been super informative for who I am as a person and how I treat people in these spaces. I think that especially in the context of what America looks like right now, it's very hard and very to kind of turn a blind eye to some things. But I think that there are a lot of folks in public service that I wasn't fully aware of that, are on the other side of the aisle, that don't believe the same things that I do, that really are just there to push for their communities and believe in what they're doing is right for the folks that they grew up with or the folks that they're representing. So I think that that was a huge change in my perspective, working with people that are not like me, people that have political ideas that are not like mine, um, and being able to work with them in a way that, every single week I would do suspensions with Republicans, and we'd find a two-thirds majority, several two-thirds majority bills to pass every single week. Because at the
Mhm.
end of the day, there are things that we can unite on, and there are things that we can work together on. And there are so many folks that, like, when they're on TV, will be screaming and hollering and whatever, but at the same time, that night they're having, drinks with the other side of the aisle. And it's just, I feel like it's everybody's there for their own reasons, but I think that most folks believe that their reason is good. And I think that in that way it gives me a different perspective about how folks think and how folks operate and how to work with those folks, to make sure that they understand your issues well. Because I think that, to talk about the port, I think that there are ways that the port can come under fire in a Republican administration, but being able to talk to those folks and kind of speak to their mindset is super helpful in being able to be an advocate as well. So I think
Mhm.
that being in Washington in general, I think it really changed the way I thought about advocacy and in working with folks who think differently than me.
Right. Yeah, so we talked about civic engagement as being one step to explore this space, and you mentioned local issues as one way to get
Mhm.
involved. But beyond that, could you share for folks who are just starting out in their careers, what are some of the best ways to find opportunities in this field, whether that's internships, jobs, or
Yeah.
networking opportunities?
I mean, I think that like the Cal State Long Beach has a lot of great things that are already kind of baked in. There's mentorship
Mhm.
programs that I've been a part of. There's a lot of resources. I think it's just being able to like just take that on. I think that the first
Mhm.
step is always scary. Um, I remember having a lot of like anxiety about like reaching out to somebody at like an internship that I was interested in, or
Mhm.
making a phone call or doing like sending a LinkedIn message.
Mhm.
So I think just like taking that step and taking a chance and seeing if like you get a response, like it's not going to hurt you. I think that a lot of folks out there, and I think that I always say this to people that come to DC too. I think that you would be surprised at how open folks are at trying to help people who are trying to get in the door. And so
Mhm.
if there's something that you're interested in, if you know somebody that's connected to it, great. If you don't, reach out. Like if there's somebody that you're actually very interested in their career path, reach out to them, ask them how they got there. People love talking about themselves. And if there's, something that you want to do, like figure out how somebody got there. I would say just sending an email or asking a trusted friend or asking a professor or asking an advisor, like the I always tell folks too that once you have a coffee or a meeting with somebody, ask them who they should meet with next, and then create that daisy chain of like continuing to have those relationships. Because I think that that also really helped me when I was looking for a job on the Hill as an intern. I met one chief of staff. They introduced me to another chief of staff. They introduced me to another chief of staff. By the time I got to my final interview in a leadership office, that leadership chief of staff was hearing from like 20 people that Deborah's great, you should hire her. So like even if it doesn't become a role for you, or if it's not a job that's like immediately ready or whatever it is, it's a connection, and keeping those connections fresh and keeping it going um is super important too. So I would just say the first step is just taking the first step. And
Yeah.
it's super intimidating, but I think once you get started and you start having that support system and that network, it feels a lot more genuine, because I think that like the term networking and feels very like sterile and weird and unnatural, and networking can tend to be that way. But I think that if you show interest, if you show passion, I think people get really jazzed about that and they remember why they got into it. And um, a lot of people, especially if they see something of themselves in that person, will try and feed it back to them. So just take the first step.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Are
Yeah.
there any mistakes that you made early in your career that you would encourage students to avoid?
Mistakes. I mean, in some ways, I kind of regret going to Disney, because Disney was just such a like out of left field thing for me. I had just wrapped up at um doing being a student government executive. I was had one more semester to go, and I was like, I'm just gonna if I was to work for a company, I would want to work for Disney. So I started as a Disney college program person, and I just worked my way up, and I ended up staying there for a year and a half. And a lot of my friends had already moved to DC. A lot of things were already happening in DC. It was the Obama years. I in some ways I had thought like, oh, I wasted my time by going this route because it was a detour. But in a lot of ways, that detour was what has helped me a lot in a lot of roles that have come past the hill. It was helpful for me, like learning about how a business thinks. It was helpful for me learning how to network. It was helpful for me to like, you know, see things within a business perspective. And it taught me a lot of things and allowed me to make more mistakes in a kind of isolated Disney setting, where like I learned from them and didn't replicate them when I went to the Hill, where it became like my career. So
Mhm.
I would say young Deborah would say that that was a mistake to kind of do the detour to go to Disney instead of like going straight to Washington, D.C. But sometimes the detour is what teaches you things that you didn't know you had to learn. Um, and I think that the time at Disney also taught me how to be a networker and how to be um, ambitious and how to work your way up the ladder and how to negotiate in some ways. And I might not have learned that had I just moved to Washington, D.C., started as an intern, and just kind of like saw what happened. I think that that gave me a lot of like confidence and in being ambitious and being able to ask for things and being able to, be in rooms with people that um, are more or are important, or who, people that, have power, and still being able to operate in those spaces and be confident and ask for what you want. So
Mhm.
again, so I would say that like young Deborah would say that's a mistake. I think looking at it now, it definitely helps me with my journey.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah.
So a lot of your progress and success you attributed partially to some of the mentorship that you had and your
Mhm.
network and people you were connected with. So who are your mentors? And if you have any mentees right now, like how have you been able to mentor them, and how have they been able to navigate their career through through
Yeah.
mentorship from you?
Yeah. I have a lot of mentors. I can list all of them. I think that it's funny also because it's like it's not like you in a lot of ways you don't ask like, hey, are you my mentor? It just naturally occurs. Um,
Hmm.
but I think that I've had a lot of people, particularly women, who have helped me in politics and have given me advice about how to navigate things, how to ask for more money, um, how to find that next job, how to negotiate that next job title, how to come back to California and figure it out. Like I have a lot of mentors that operate in different spaces, and I kind of have like a kitchen cabinet, as it were, where I'm able to solicit advice from them. Um, and those types of things organically happen. Also, on the flip side of being a mentor, I have tons of people that I've mentored in trying to, find jobs on the Hill. When I was working in House leadership, I helped member offices staff up. So I worked a lot with people's resumes and met with hundreds of people. And those people are now chiefs of staffs in different member offices and are now comms directors or were in the White House or whatever it was. Um, because I think that inevitably all these people that are interns will become your boss. And I always tell folks that's like how you should look at it because everybody has the ability to move up quickly. Everybody has the ability to do your job. So investing in your community and investing in the people around you is super important. So, um, I have a lot of mentees. I've done a lot of mentorship work through Cal State Long Beach as well. Um, and I encourage them to keep the conversation going. I hear from some folks like out of the woodwork, and they're like, I've just moved to DC. Who should I talk to? I'm able to immediately connect them to somebody that's in their space. Um, so again, it goes back to the relationships and being consistent and being open and being authentic and when you have those people that you trust, you keep them. And then when I'm able to find folks that I may see, a young Deborah or somebody that I see potential in, I keep them around and I want to make sure that they're continuing to do well. In fact, somebody I just hired, so I hired somebody when they were for their internship and when they were a staff assistant when they started at the front desk and they followed me up through the ranks, held every single job that I held. And then when I left the Hill, they went over to work for Catherine Clark, and he is now, as of this week, he's the floor director for Democratic Whip Catherine Clark. So I'm super proud of that. I think that a lot of being a mentor is being able to, really celebrate the wins of the people that you work with, and um, you know, I'm super proud of the things that I've given back, but I'm very grateful for the people who have invested in me, which is part of this cycle.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And for our last question, I wanted to bring it back to Cal State Long Beach and our campus. If you could come back and relive your Cal State Long Beach experience as a student, would you do anything differently knowing what you know now?
Yeah, I mean, being like the first 2 years, I really wasn't involved. I was just being the commuter student coming in and out, potentially maybe having, being more involved in the beginning. And I would also say, like, to the questions you've asked about getting involved, it took me a long time to get involved. And I still, in the last 2 years of my college, like of my college years, and I've mentored a lot of people who have been transfer students, and are like, I only have 2 years. And like, you can do a lot in 2 years. So, um, I would say that I regret that, but I think it did establish my mindset academically, and I graduated with a 3.94 GPA, and like I really thrived academically, but I also thrived socially and I thrived, professionally and all of that. So I think that I could say that I would want to be more involved, but that would have changed the trajectory, I feel, of everything. I met my husband through student government. There's so many things in my life that occurred at Long Beach. And if it had been done a different way or a different sequence, I might not have, the life I have now. So,
Yeah,
it's the same thing about like, do I have a regret about, in the beginning of my career? I think that you do, but then you don't because it leads you to where you're supposed to be going. So,
right.
yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much. It looks like we
Yeah.
don't have any more questions. So
Great.
thank you for joining us today. And once again, to everyone, please visit the alumni website in the weeks ahead to see this recording and any other recordings, as well as the schedule of upcoming virtual events. And as a reminder as well, to sign up for CSU Voices to stay informed and take action on state and federal issues shaping this future of the CSU. Lastly, make sure to follow us on LinkedIn. And thank you, everyone. Go Beach.
Go Beach.